Good morning and congratulations to you for being here. This is really kind of exciting for us because we're happy to be here and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you because even without you having said a word to us, we're proud of you for the effort you've put into this. So this is really kind of neat. My name is Lindsay Draper. I am retired from the juvenile court bench here in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, and my colleagues are
I am Robert Allison. I am a history professor at Suffolk University in Boston.
And I'm Jack Barlow. I am a politics professor at Juniata College in Pennsylvania, but I have to ask Sam Swinson, just for the record, are those signs laminated or are they just pieces of paper?
They're just pieces of paper.
Oh, okay. I'm disappointed. Okay. All right.
okay. So could I ask you to introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, we are Unit 2 from Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut. My name is Christian Wadwani.
My name is Aiden Rogers.
I'm Allie Schwartz, and this is our teacher, Mrs. Camerman.
Well, first of all, Ms. Cameron, thank you so much for the work that you've done. And all of you all pay attention to when Teacher Appreciation Week shows up. So be sure you can do the right thing. All right, so the question, and you've already told me you're Unit 2, so I probably should read you a Unit 2 question. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? Begin.
During the convention, Delegate Elbridge Gerry announced there was not a 1,000th part of our fellow citizens who were not against every approach towards monarchy. This restriction, while seemingly obvious today, was revolutionary in the Western world.
Recognizing the need for a republic, James Madison crafted the Virginia Plan before leaving for Philadelphia. His plan proposed a bicameral legislature. The lower house would be directly elected, and from nominees proposed by the state legislatures would choose the members of the upper house. Both houses favored larger states with representation proportional to population.
The New Jersey Plan, proposed by Delegate William Patterson, proposed a continuation of the Confederation Congress, which meant a unicameral legislature in which states were represented as delegations, not as representatives. Small states rallied around this plan, which maintained their legislative power. Representative John Lansing praised the plan, arguing it maintained the sovereignty of the respective states, while the Virginia Plan would absorb, quote, all power except the little local matters, which are not objects worthy of the supreme cognizance.
Delegate Alexander Hamilton of New York proposed a system in which both senators and the executive would serve for life. He argued that the New Jersey Plan would maintain all the passions of avarice, ambition, and interest, which govern most individuals and all public bodies, while lifetime terms would separate leaders from these factors.
In the mid-1780s, the United States faced an economic crisis, prompting debtors to request relief from their state governments. To reduce debts, Rhode Island inflated its currency so far as to deem it worthless. Madison, observing many crises like this one, concluded that the direct voice of the people is dangerous to the country. He writes in Federalist 10 that the new Constitution was crafted so the public voice pronounced by the representatives of the people will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves.
However, history has proved Madison wrong. In 1833, over 45 years after the convention, he wrote, quote, the vital principle of the Republican government is the will of the majority. The 17th Amendment was passed after the recognition that representatives are more corruptible than the people. Our country has slowly come to the conclusion that all people, regardless of race or sex, should see their will represented. The United States has taken steps to distance itself from the elitist sense of republicanism that Madison supported, but still has a ways to go.
James Wilson argued the legislature ought to be the most exact transcript of the whole society, the faithful echo of the voices of the people. However, our plurality system only represents the largest faction. Those outside this faction are not represented in their so-called representative government. This has resulted in a polarized two-party institution, the destruction of third-party candidates, and the continued abuse of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is redrawing district lines for partisan benefit. either packing like-minded voters together or thinly spreading them out, both in order to minimize their representation. Politics professor Douglas J. Amy said, gerrymandering is one of the great political curses of our single-member district plurality system, and one that can only truly be lifted by adopting proportional representation.
Multi-member districting, a form of proportional representation, has the ability to minimize the impact of partisan manipulation. The system combines current districts into districts of greater populations, then takes all the votes and apportions them to candidates through a system of ranked choice voting. Larger districts that proportionally represent citizens would reduce the impact of gerrymandering, representing the voter base more accurately. Even if a faction doesn't hold plurality, they too can see their voice heard in government and their vote remains valid. The impact of multi-member districts could depolarize the current two-party system and restore third-party candidates.
John Adams, in Thoughts on Government, writes, quote, the government should think, feel, reason, and act like the people. Multi-member district would allow the government to act as such and truly serve as a direct representation of the people, discerning their viewpoints and serving on behalf of their best interest as the framers originally intended. Thank you. We are now ready for questioning.
Thank you. I want to be sure that I understand your multi-member district. Would that involve enlarging the size of the House of Representatives? And if so, by how much?
So creating multi-member districts would involve enlarging the size of the House of Representatives, simply because we would like to also ensure that we would have a system that better has a plurality system in which we can properly represent minority groups. But we can't exactly enumerate how much, simply because we don't have specific numbers. Maybe Ali has them.
Yeah. In French political science, Maurice Duverger created Duverger's law, which says that proportional representation results in a multi-member district, whereas the plurality system will result in a two-party system. We have to expand these districts to represent these smaller voices. As you can see in our current government and through like the 2000 election, voting for instance, a Green Party candidate often goes to benefit a complete different ideological candidate as it did in 2000, resulting in the representation of the Republican Party instead of the ideological similar Democrat Party. So you'd have to expand it to represent these small voices.
So I apologize for doing the follow-up here, but what I want to know is, if we expand, is there a point that we will stop expanding as the population of the country grows? Is there a limit to the number of people that we're going to have? Or will we develop an entity that's too big to govern?
Well, that also is an important thing to consider just with how Congress functions. If there's too many people within the House of Representatives, it can't function efficiently. If there's thousands of representatives and to represent the whole nation, and if that continues to grow, the body of government couldn't function correctly. So there definitely needs to be a limit, and determining that limit would have to do with population and yeah.
But I believe also, as we've seen, the legislature has a very slow, not super efficient system, but we've seen that countered by the executive, which makes very fast decisions and has the ability to make these decisions through executive orders and veto power. They almost have the power of the legislature. So at this point, we just want the people to be represented as such and equally represented in Congress, whereas currently they are not.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, the system was created, recognizing the executive will have dispatch, the deliberative body is the legislature. And I'm wondering a couple of things. One, is that simply going to be ceding all power to the executive because Congress can't do anything? And secondly, I was wondering, as you were talking about something John C. Calhoun said, the real problem is not in the representatives, but in the constituents. That you have this representative body, but it is not, you can see an inherent problem here. If you have a legislative body that is simply too big, yeah, everyone has a voice, but nothing ever gets done. And minorities always are going to be at odds. And Now I think I'm giving a lecture instead of, I'm answering my own question, but I really want you to think, and it follows on what Judge Draper was saying, is the system itself, is the country itself going to be too big to be governed like this? And is this system going to create problems we're not anticipating?
So to start off with the first question about the executive, just to quickly brush over that. So I think when you ask, will the executive become too powerful in this new world where Congress is ineffective? I think this is unlikely only because the president often has the power to move Congress along, like my partner mentioned, through an executive order. But an executive order is not a permanent action, right? And so it requires congressional approval at some point to formalize it. And so essentially our goal is to use, essentially we say the president oftentimes can push Congress forward in a quicker motion, but the president doesn't have the power to unilaterally run the government at all times. Then to get into your second part of the question about whether the government will too big to govern, I think this really comes down to the role of the delegate or the representative. And essentially, we see the representative has to represent large groups of people with varying opinions. However, when we talk about something like multi-member districts, you can have a representative that represents a very specific demographic. And so this is beneficial because the representative isn't then having to figure out, am I representing less fortunate or more fortunate groups? Am I representing racial minorities or am I representing a largely white district? We can have it so that you have one representative that represents one demographic and one representative that represents a separate demographic. And so this allows them to make opinions that benefit their constituents.
In our congressional district, we have a very affluent community in which we live in, and then we have a far lower class community. And through that, we're not saying that our delegate specifically does this, but they would have the ability to completely silence that voice and silence the lower class voice. So we just believe that through multi-member districts and expanding these districts, you have the ability to represent all these little voices and make sure that no one gets silenced in their government, violating all principles of democracy.
So I'm curious, the Constitution doesn't mention anything at all about congressional districts, right? I mean, there's no reason that every state couldn't elect its representatives at large. But how many representatives would you need to have? I mean, this is back to the first question, in order for every state to have elections that would be competitive and genuinely representative?
So I think first, when we talk about at-large elections, we often see the biggest problem, at least with at-large elections that aren't proportional, is you just have a single party running, a single party representing a state in the House. And this was, in fact, the goal of small states when, in the beginning, when they didn't use districts, they said, let's use at-large elections and we can get all anti-federalists into, or Democratic Republicans into Congress. Right? However, we see that is the problem we're trying to avoid with multi-member districts by getting a more proportional system.
At the time of the convention, anti-federalists feared even representing above 30,000 people per delegate. And now we're at a place that 700,000 people are being represented by one delegate. So I understand the worries of an inefficient government, but at this point, it really feels like people are being silenced by their government in the districts.
How do you represent, sorry.
No, go.
How do you represent minority groups, right? Do you have a Black American representative and an Asian American representative and so on? How do you do that?
Well, when we have these multi-member districts, it's easier for some of these smaller groups to vote for a representative, because if it's voting for representatives in a larger district, their votes accumulate most likely to getting a candidate for themselves. Like as we see now in Connecticut, there's a far greater Democratic majority in our congressmen. However, if there were a multi-member district, there would be more Republican representation. So some of these smaller groups have more opportunity to get representation.
And should I call it or should I continue?
Because you hadn't started, I'm going to go ahead and say
Okay.
we'll follow the time bit, but I apologize for that, and
Okay.
good job. Okay, so let me give you just a couple of thoughts. First of all, this was fascinating. I I had many questions I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask does any of this have anything to do with the Senate? I mean, I wanted to pursue a number of areas, but one of the things I really would love to chat it with you about is this concept, and I want to be sure that you talked about representing a specific demographic. And one of the very interesting things I think in our country right now is we have a belief that every demographic is a monolith. We sort of assume that every Hispanic, every African American, everybody under the age of 34, I mean, we've got this belief that folks are all the same if they're in a demographic. And I don't know that I believe that that is true. And that's why that's frankly what prompted my question. If we're trying to do this representative piece, how many folks are we gonna have? Because so anyway, I would just challenge you, just as you're having this discussion, because this was really interesting and it was quite, I had a lot I wanted, okay, I need to be quiet. I had a lot I wanted to talk to you all about. Really enjoyed it. You all take care. Thanks.
I also enjoyed it very much, and I liked in your opening, you begin with Elbridge Gerry and you end up with gerrymandering. I don't know if that was intentional, but it was really well done. And, you know, using the debt crisis of the 1780s, other things, you really covered the history very well. Like Judge Draper, I also have a lot of questions about this, and I think any smart politician is going to figure out a way to manipulate the system, which is one of the things Madison understood and the others understood in creating a system where ambition will check ambition. And I think an idea that we're going to design an ideal system where you're not going to have manipulation and you're not going to have the vicious arts of politics being practiced is, well, it's idealistic. And I think the fact that you're beginning this discussion now is really interesting. And I think, you know, you'll have long lives where you'll be working out these various issues. Just for the record, my city councilor, my mayor, and my representative in Congress are all African-American women who do, of course, represent the people in their districts, the people who elected them, which I think is what a successful politician is going to recognize he or she has to do. So I think, you know, you're off to a very good start. I really enjoyed listening to you, and like Judge Draper, I would have liked more time to discuss these things with you. And I do look forward to hearing more from you as you go on in your lives as citizens. So thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed your opening statement as well. I thought it was very well crafted. I liked that you said that history has proved that Madison is wrong, which, you know, gotta hand it to you. You know, I appreciate that you used political science, but I don't really trust any political scientist. Speaking as a political scientist, you know, I know these people, and I wouldn't trust them. You know, but that's, I mean, you did a nice job of kind of looking at the literature on representation currently. And applying it, right, and saying, you know, this is a plausible alternative to what we've been doing, and here's how it might develop. You may change your minds in 2 years or 5 years or 30 years. Maybe history will prove you wrong too, just as it proved Madison wrong. But you know, you're thinking about that, and I think that's a really important point. We didn't get to talk about civic education and whether that might be something that we should pay some attention to. You guys clearly are getting a very fine civic education. You're thinking about it. You're probably arguing about it back behind the scenes, and that's fine. And that's what we all should be doing. So I commend you for that. I hope you'll keep on doing it. You're always welcome to come to Juniata College and continue that here. So I'm just saying, it's not a bad trip. So Thank you very much, and hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.
Let me also say Suffolk University is at the other end of the Acela line, and also you're also welcome to come here.
With those advertisements, I see the hearing is over, and I will stop the recording.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank